All right, is Mike Huckabee a birther? During an appearance on the Steve Malzberg radio show, the host was trying to keep the ridiculous conservative theory alive. He wanted to know why President Obama spent millions in court defending against having to present a birth certificate and all that same nonsense. Now, here's the response.
Don't you think we deserve to know more about this man?
I would love to know more, but what I know is troubling enough. And one thing that I do know is his having grown up in Kenya. His view of the Brits, for example, very different than the average American. When he gave the bust back to
Winston
the Brits,
Churchill,
Winston Churchill, a great insult to the British. But then if you think about it, his perspective as growing up in Kenya with a Kenyan father and grandfather, their view of the Mau Mau Revolution in Kenya is very different than ours, because he probably grew up hearing that the British were a bunch of imperialists who persecuted his grandfather.
Now, there he said that Obama grew up in Kenya not once but twice. In reality, of course, President Obama was born in Hawaii and was raised in Hawaii. Did go to Indonesia for some years. Oh, my God. Wait till they get a load of that. And by the way, just in case you're keeping track, the number of years that President Obama lived in Kenya would be 0. A spokesman for Huckabee commented today saying it was nothing more than a misstatement. Of course, we meant that he grew up in Uganda. Okay, he didn't say that last part, but you know they were thinking it.
Back to horrible time of the sideshow. First up, we know a lot of Republicans wrongly believe that President Obama was born and raised in Kenya over in Africa. Guess who recently joined the birther chorus? Mike Huckabee. Here's Huck on radio yesterday talking about the president.
Don't you think we deserve to know more about this man?
I would love to know more, but what I know is troubling enough. And one thing that I do know is his having grown up in Kenya. His view of the Brits, for example, very different than the average American.
Well, the reality, of course, is President Obama grew up in Hawaii, one of the states of the Union, and Indonesia when he had a stepfather there. In fact, he didn't even visit Kenya in his entire youth, ever. Huckabee's spokesperson, by the way, finally backpedaled late today, saying his boss simply misspoke. Yeah, he was pandering to that radio guy. Next.
Time for tonight's rewrite. If you think of Mike Huckabee as a genial guitar-playing, singing former governor of Arkansas who meets the basic integrity standards typical of former governors of Arkansas, you will be shocked, absolutely shocked, by what he said yesterday.
Why, Mr. Obama, did you spend millions of dollars in courts all over this country to defend against having to present a birth certificate? It's one thing to say, you've seen it, goodbye. But why go to court and send lawyers to defend against having to show it? Don't you think we deserve to know more about this man?
I would love to know more, but what I know is troubling enough. And one thing that I do know is his having grown up in Kenya. His view of the Brits, for example, very different than the average American.
Well, maybe it would be if he grew up in Kenya, but Barack Obama did not grow up in Kenya.
His perspective as growing up in Kenya with a Kenyan father and grandfather.
No. He did not grow up in Kenya. Yes, he did have a Kenyan father and grandfather, but he did not grow up there. This is what we know. This is what is beyond dispute. Barack Obama was born in Hawaii. He lived in the United States until he was 6. His mother moved to Indonesia, where Barack Obama went to school from ages 6 to 10. At age 10, he moved back to Hawaii, where he lived until he went off to college in California. Not Kenya, California. Huckabee refers to Obama growing up in Kenya as, quote, the one thing I do know. If that is the one thing that Mike Huckabee knows, then Huckabee knows less than nothing. That would presumably hold for governance. What does that mean Huckabee knows about Social Security? What does Huckabee know about Medicare? What does Huckabee know about the defense budget? What does Huckabee know about what we should do next in Libya? What does Huckabee know about anything other than how to lose weight? As the pressure mounted today on Huckabee for lying about where the president grew up, Huckabee's handlers issued the lamest possible press release in reaction to getting caught in an outright lie. It was, quote, Governor Huckabee simply misspoke. Huckabee wants to leave it at that because he knows this particular brand of misspeaking is very, very useful for inspiring support of the 51% of national Republican primary voters who believe that Barack Obama is not a citizen of the United States. Mike Huckabee desperately wants every one of their votes if he's going to run for president next year. In his ugly pursuit of those votes, he has now fallen below the already low standard for integrity that we have come to expect from former governors of Arkansas.
Welcome back to The Ed Show. Thanks for watching tonight. It's time for the takedown. Republican presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee wants to have his cake and eat it too, but the only thing is he put his foot in his mouth today. Now, Media Matters heard his appearance with conservative radio talk show host on the low-rated Steve Malzberg show. Here's Huckabee's response to questions about the president's citizenship.
Don't you think we deserve to know more about this man?
I would love to know more, but what I know is troubling enough. And one thing that I do know is his having grown up in Kenya. His view of the Brits, for example, very different than the average American.
So, Mike Huckabee says President Obama grew up in Kenya, even though the president's own biography says he grew up in Hawaii and Indonesia. Maybe Huckabee just misspoke.
His perspective as growing up in Kenya with a Kenyan father and grandfather, their view of the Mau Mau Revolution in Kenya is very different than ours because he probably grew up hearing that the British were a bunch of imperialists who persecuted his grandfather.
Interesting. Huckabee tried to clarify these statements on his HuckPack website, saying, I simply misspoke when I alluded to President Obama growing up in Kenya and meant to say Indonesia. So he misspoke and meant Indonesia, even though he said Kenya twice, you heard it, and talked about the Mau Mau rebellion against the British in Kenya. But take a look at Huckabee's past statements about the President of the United States. This is the first sentence of his new book. Quote, since Barack Obama was elected, plenty of books have been written criticizing his administration, accusing him of all sorts of things, from being a Marxist to lying about his citizenship to being a Muslim. But if you know me, or if you're familiar with my commentaries on TV and radio, you know I don't like to make politics personal. Well, he made similar comments about birthers on Good Morning America last week.
For Republicans to even be bringing it up, I think it's a waste of energy and time. Let's focus on the issues with which we have disagreement, not on really the extraneous personal things that are immaterial.
Now, you may ask, why didn't Huckabee say the same thing to Steve Malzberg on right-wing radio today? Well, here's why. A recent poll showed 51% of likely Republican primary voters believe President Obama was born in another country. Of those 51%, Mike Huckabee is their top choice for president. So when you ask the non-birthers in the GOP, their choice is Mitt Romney. Huckabee has to keep the birthers happy, but he can't win the general election by pandering to them. He hasn't officially announced his candidacy, but make no mistake about it, Mike Huckabee is already running a couple of campaigns. And that's the takedown.